Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. When mentioning the Qing Dynasty, many people may first think of the exile to Ningguta. This image is mostly shaped by historical films and TV shows. But what exactly was Ningguta? Was it really as terrifying as people imagine? In reality, Ningguta was merely a place name. And it wasn't the eerie, horrifying prison depicted in some stories and movies. Prisoners exiled to Ningguta were usually sent far away from Beijing, away from centers of political power, with the aim of preventing them from posing a threat to political authority. Although these exiles were removed from the capital, it did not mean their lives were over. In fact, most of them settled in Ningguta, leading ordinary lives until one day they might be recalled to court or granted a pardon. But what happened to those who were exiled to Ningguta when the Qing Dynasty collapsed? According to relevant historians, the name Ningguta, which now sounds shrouded in mystery, actually refers to the area around Mudanjiang in present-day Heilongjiang province. Although this place may seem unfamiliar to us today, during the Qing Dynasty, it was an extremely important region, both a famous place of exile and a political and cultural center on the frontier. The history of Ningguta as a place of exile can be traced back to the early Qing period. At that time, with the Qing army's entry into the Central Plains, social order in the entire region gradually stabilized. To consolidate control over the borderlands, the Qing dynasty began to implement the exile system. According to some historical records, the exile system was not just a means of punishment for the Qing dynasty. It was also a political tool. By exiling criminals to the distant borderlands, the Qing not only reduced their influence over the central government but also helped strengthen control over the frontier by increasing the population there. Particularly during that time, the stability of the borderlands was crucial for the survival of the Qing regime. As a place of exile, Ningguta had a harsh natural environment and extremely difficult living conditions. The severe cold and desolation were a great torment for the exiles. The long periods of harsh conditions forced the exiles to face enormous survival pressures. Many of them died from disease, hunger, or the cold. This environment was precisely the means the Qing rulers used to punish and warn the exiles, hoping their suffering would remind others not to break the law. However, Ningguta was not just a painful place of exile, it also played a more complex historical role. During the Qing dynasty, Ningguta was located on the northeastern frontier, near the borders with Russia and other neighboring countries. It was an important diplomatic and military site. Therefore, in addition to being a place of exile, Ningguta was also a key political and cultural center. The area was not only home to a large military presence but also a gathering place for officials, scholars, and merchants, creating a relatively prosperous political and cultural circle. The formation of this political-cultural circle was closely related to the Qing dynasty's banner system. The banner people, or bannermen, were the privileged class of the Qing dynasty. They enjoyed many benefits and also bore the responsibility of maintaining Qing rule. The bannermen were divided into different ranks, with the lowest rank, typically engaged in agricultural labor or combat, while the middle-ranking, pijia, were responsible for guarding the borders. Most of the pijia were surrendered ethnic minorities from the borderlands who contributed significantly to the stability and expansion of the Qing dynasty. To appease these pijia people, the Qing government took certain special measures, one of which was exiling some criminals to Ningguta and having them serve the pijia people. This practice not only favored the pijia but also helped to strengthen control over the frontier. Therefore, in reality, through exile, Ningguta not only attracted a large number of prisoners but also facilitated the integration of frontier ethnic groups, promoting the development of the local society. The exiled prisoners brought with them the culture, technology, and way of life from the Central Plains. They communicated with the local ethnic groups and gradually contributed to the cultural prosperity and economic development of the Ningguta region. Moreover, for the people from the Central Plains during the Qing Dynasty, the northeast was undoubtedly a cold, harsh, bitter land. The winters here were long and severe, with piercing cold winds and heavy snow, and almost no one could feel warmth. For those exiles who had never experienced the northern cold, the freezing conditions along the journey alone were enough to claim their lives. These exiles were usually poorly dressed and severely lacking in food, especially those from the south or central plains. They were simply unable to adapt to the harsh climate and difficult conditions. Many died on the way to Ningguta from the cold, hunger, or illness. According to the regulations at the time, exiled prisoners were often required to reach Ningguta within a month and a half. A task that was almost impossible for most exiles who were physically exhausted and mentally broken. In order to meet the deadline, many had to push themselves forward, resulting in overexertion and physical collapse. Those who failed to complete the journey on time were often subjected to even harsher punishment. And some, unable to bear the weight of such a burden, even committed suicide along the way. Even those who barely survived the long journey and eventually reached Ningguta found that their suffering was far from over. Although the environment in Ningguta was harsh, what was even more cruel to these prisoners was the loss of their freedom and dignity. Upon arrival, they became slaves, completely at the mercy of the Pijia men. Among these exiles, the women suffered especially tragic fates. They not only had to endure heavy labor but also faced endless bullying and humiliation from the Pijia men. The physical torment and psychological oppression led many women to choose to end their suffering by taking their own lives, or to disappear, escaping this unrelenting pain. It is worth noting that not all the exiles in Ningguta were ordinary civilians. Among these exiled groups, there were some who had once held high positions and wielded significant power. For these individuals who had once enjoyed wealth and status, exile was not only a physical torment but also a complete destruction of their dignity. The former high-standing identities and positions were completely obliterated in the harsh life of exile. And they became slaves of the Pijia men, subject to their every whim. This immense fall from grace was often an unbearable blow for these former elites. A typical example is Zheng Zhilong, the father of the famed naval hero Zheng Qinggong. Once a maritime overlord, Zheng Zhilong fell afoul of the court and was ultimately exiled to Ningguta. Once dominant in politics and military affairs, Zheng Zhilong became an undignified exile in Ningguta. Reduced to slavery, living in a state of degradation and helplessness, enduring incredibly painful times. It is worth mentioning that with the fall of the Qing Dynasty, the fate of the exiled prisoners who had suffered so much in Ningguta also took a new turn. Under the Qing Dynasty, these exiles seemed to be forgotten corners of history, their lives and deaths swaying with the rise and fall of the empire. However, when the Qing Dynasty's death knell sounded, signaling its demise, the lives of these individuals began to change subtly. According to relevant historical records, some of the exiles, over the long years of their banishment, became accustomed to the harsh conditions of Ningguta. They endured hardships beyond what most could imagine, and even found ways to survive in this remote land. These people chose to settle in Ningguta, gradually becoming what could be described as green forest bandits, or more simply, thieves or mountain bandits. Zhang Zuolin is a typical example of such a figure. Early in his life, Zhang gained prominence for helping the Qing dynasty suppress bandits. And over time, he built his own power, eventually becoming a warlord during the Republic of China era. For others, although the long years of exile were harsh, their deepest wish was still to return to their hometowns and reunite with their families. With the fall of the Qing dynasty and the gradual improvement of transportation, more opportunities became available for these exiles. They began to reach out through various means to contact their hometowns and search for a way back. Carrying a deep sense of homesickness, these exiles made great efforts and eventually returned to their homeland. For them, the process of returning home was not only a solace for the suffering endured over many years but also marked the end of their long exile, allowing them to rediscover who they once were. There were also those who chose to integrate with the Pijia men or other ethnic groups in the Ningguta region, gradually becoming the new masters of the area. Long-term interactions allowed these exiles to merge with the local cultures and lifestyles. They not only adapted to the harsh environment but also began to embrace the culture and customs of the land. These individuals no longer saw themselves as outsiders, but rather as fully integrated members of the Ningguta society, even becoming part of the local community. Perhaps they had let go of their longing for their homeland, establishing new families and careers on this new land. For them, Ningguta was no longer a place of exile and oppression, but had become a new home. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.